Hi, Nicole. Thank you for joining us. I'm so excited that you were able to come to one of our
Of
episodes.
course.
So today, I wanted to talk about our program, Substance Use Prevention. We go out to the community, educate our families, our youth, the
Mhm.
people. And one of the biggest questions we get is, well, what is prevention?
Mhm.
Like people come to our table and sometimes they're like, oh, you have treatment services. How can I help my loved one? What's the information you have? And we're like, we do have information on that, but our
Right.
department is prevention. And they're like,
Right.
what is that?
I think prevention can look like a lot of different things, and I feel like it's really hard to have one size fits all, because a lot of times it's not that case. So it's really important that we share stories, sharing resources and education. Um, that's crucial, especially when you're educating about substance
Yeah.
abuse, right, or prevention on substance abuse. But it's always hard to identify what that looks like, right? And I'm
Yeah.
sure you get a lot of questions on that.
Yeah. Sharing your stories, the education, sharing the information because you can't prevent something if you don't know
Right.
that something is there or that risk is there.
Mm-hmm.
We can bring all this information to members in our community
Mm-hmm.
who don't have access to get that information, don't have the technology
Right.
or the time because they have to be working, day and night
Mm-hmm.
to be able to research on like, okay, well, like I saw that there's electronic cigarettes now, or that there's people dying of fentanyl overdoses. Maybe that could affect me or my family.
Right.
I should try to prevent something.
It kind of comes down to transparency and accessibility
Yeah.
of those resources, which is why I think the work that you are doing is really important, is reaching out to the community and educating them on what they may or may not know, because we don't know what we don't know. And at the end of the day, if there's a cycle that starts and you're in the cycle, and if you're not aware that you're in it, it's hard for you to come out of it. And I think that's when folks get into a lot of trouble, is when that cycle continues on for generations. Um, and that's where resources come in handy, and storytelling as well, especially if you're out there and sharing your story and what you're hearing out in the community as well. That's huge. So when I was in 5th or 6th grade, my one of my uncles tragically lost his life as a result of gun violence. This happened about a 2 minute walking distance from my house. And I remember this event pretty clearly. Although I wasn't in close proximity to where it happened, I saw the after effects of it, right? It's easy when something like that tragically happens, people deal with it differently, right? People might deal with it with alcohol, drug abuse. And so I was well aware of that because of my parents being super transparent with me and my sister, making us aware of those cycles that happened. This tragic event happens, then people cope either with good coping skills or not so good coping skills. And I saw at a young age how maybe not the best decision was made, and then bad consequences happened. Yeah. And so that lesson has followed with me up until this point, and I've recognized that for me, the power that I have is to create a life that that I want, right? I have the power of navigating my situation, and for me, it's understanding those cycles, because if you're in it, you don't know what you don't know, and it's easy to get caught up in that cycle, and it persists for generations to come, right? And so I've been really intentional with the decisions that I've made, and pursuing this path, for example, and breaking those barriers and breaking those generational cycles that can persist. And that's where I think prevention and education around substance use is crucial. I'm going to start medical school. My goal is to become a doctor while also inspiring the next generation of physicians. I grew up here in Oxnard. I went to school in the state of Washington, but I came back after college to work and volunteer out in this community to give back and to be that inspiration for young folks to say, if she can do it, I can do it. And that's essentially the reason why I wanted to come today, is to share my story. If I can inspire one person, then I feel like I've done my job.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
You'll be going to medical school.
Yeah, I'm really excited. It has been a long path to get to this point. But I also recognize that there needs to be a lot of resources for young folks if they are interested in this career, not only in medicine, right? Not only becoming a physician, but also I know a lot of students are interested in becoming nurses, PAs, so physician associates, MDs, DOs. So if I can be that bridge and connect individuals to resources, then I'm more than happy to do that.
Well, that's so great, Nicole, that one of your goals is to inspire the youth in our community, because with so many things going on in our community right now with substance use, mental health issues, gun violence, social media, it's just so crazy that there's so many negative things that our youth can walk towards, and you inspiring them that you can pick a pathway to go to medical school or whatever else it is that they want to do. That's great.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for saying that. I am one of the oldest of 30 grandchildren on my mom's side. And so with that comes a lot of responsibility, right? To be that role model for my younger cousins. And so growing up, what you mentioned, right? Gun violence, substance abuse, those aren't foreign concepts to me. And unfortunately, that's not foreign to a lot of my younger cousins. That's been one of my motivating factors to pursue this path. With that said, it hasn't been easy because it is hard to create a path that you can't really see. And there aren't that many physicians that I encountered that are Latina. So that also posed another barrier. And so I have made it one of my missions to be as active as I can with my younger cousins and also out in the community to show them that if I can do it, a girl from Oxnard, then they can also do that. And so for me, it's just making that dream a little bit more tangible for them and giving them the resources too, right? I had a younger cousin reach out to me and he's like, hey, I have questions about financial aid. Can you help me? And I was like, yeah, of course. So these are things that I think for me, it was a lot of learning along the way that is now paying off, right? So that's kind of one example of being that for not only my family, but also the community too. Being first generation, my parents were a little scared, but they supported me 100%. This was the first time somebody in the family went to a 4-year, so that was something new to them.
I actually have my bachelor's from CSUCI locally here. Nice. I went straight from high school. I had applied, well, this whole thing was new too for me because my parents migrated here from Mexico, so nobody in my family had gone to a university or even to college or anything. I'm not like the oldest of all my cousins, so it was all new. And I wasn't even going to apply to anything because to me it was just like my parents were always like, oh, you're going to get an education, because that's like the only way that you'll be able to succeed here. There was no other option. So I was just like, okay, I'll go to Oxnard College. Like that's what I'm going to do. Towards my senior year, some lady at school was like, you could go to a 4-year university. And I'm like, what's that? Like, yeah. And then that's I applied to 4 different schools and decided to stay local. I have 2 bachelors, psychology and sociology.
That's a huge accomplishment. Did you find it hard to find mentors? I know you mentioned someone did kind of help you.
I think it's really, really hard. Especially like growing up where I grew up and just taking into consideration like, all the, substance use trends and just like basically like living where I lived. It was more of like, most of us were in the low income, type around there, some apartments. So, and then a lot of people that wasn't like what they were. There was like no resources. Like if you needed help for school, like, hey, you want to know how to fill out an application or anything like that. It wasn't really like, the thing. So this person who came into our high school kind of like serve that purpose. Like she's like, this is what a 4-year school is. This is what, community college is. And this is what you do. And you have to take the SATs and like all of that. I had no idea of any of that. So and that's why I am such a big believer in prevention. Like prevention and outreach, and it's like I think you need that. Like you need it because there's so many, not just us Latinos, but like there's just so many other people that need that help. And the resources that otherwise you wouldn't know about. And because of her, I love prevention and outreach.
My story was similar in that pursuing higher education was no question. We were going to go to college. I have a twin sister, and she was applying to the Naval Academy. And so fortunately, there was a free resource available to her, helping her throughout the whole process. And I remember hiding upstairs, and the lady saw me, and she was like, "Hey, are you interested in applying to college?" And I was like, "Well, I've been storing like a box full of letters that I've been receiving from colleges, but I have no idea what to do with them." And so she asked me, like, "What are you looking for in a school?" And that was the first time somebody asked me that. And I was like, well, I don't know. So she helped me narrow down a list. But it takes one person, right, to be that and to see your potential. And that kind of goes back to prevention, right? Because it's a very difficult and challenging topic, but a lot of it comes down to the resources available and connecting one-on-one and personalizing the resources and the outreach too. Because a lot of times we have the same questions, but we might be afraid to ask for help, right? And so that kind of ties into the behavioral health portion too, where I don't know if it's like a personal thing or like an ego thing or a cultural thing, where a lot of us don't like to ask for help, but a lot of times that's what we need to get ahead. And I think we should be normalizing that. It's okay to ask for help.
Yeah, definitely.
I don't think I ever thought about becoming a doctor, just because I, again, didn't have any family members or friends, anyone in my social circle that were doctors. But now looking back, being able to reflect on my journey and my support system makes me feel empowered, because I don't think my 6-year-old version of myself would think that I would ever make it to this point. But with that said, I do recognize that it took a village for me to achieve this. I think mentorship is crucial. I have struggled to find mentors in the healthcare field, but a lot of my mentors are not in healthcare, aren't doctors. I have a few that I have been able to contact, and I do call them mentors, that are physicians practicing today. But I do also recognize that there is a need. And so what my goal is to accomplish one day is be that mentor for another girl or another person that is underrepresented in medicine, because I know how much it meant to me, and that guidance was crucial in helping me navigate to where I'm at today. I feel empowered when I reflect on the journey that I've taken thus far, and I just can't wait to see what else I'm able to accomplish with my support system cheering me on along the way. I've come to realize that it's hard to follow a map that doesn't exist. I mentioned about there's only 6% of physicians that identify as Latino, and of the 6, only 2.4 identify as Latina. And so there is a need, and there is a disparity too in that, because the community, right, there are a lot of barriers to care, whether that be language barriers, financial barriers. To me, is if we can limit that, and if I can be that bridge between the community and medicine, that essentially will be my life's mission, being a doctor. And one of my biggest goals is to also go back to the community that I come from, right? To give back, to volunteer, to mentor, because I do recognize that I also didn't realize that I wanted to be a doctor until I was 16, but I was even afraid to say that out loud because it's not common, right? I think the last thing I wanted someone to say was like, well, like that, that's hard, right? Because everybody knows that it's hard, it's competitive, but I wanted to make sure that I had everything I had the tools and resources that I needed to do what I needed to get done. And so there's a quote that I like. It reads, I don't want it to be easy, I want it to be worth it. And so that's kind of my mantra is I know this path is not going to be easy, but I know it will be worth it.
I love that you bring up the fact that your parents were able to openly talk about what are the things that maybe some other people in your family are using as a coping skill when a tragedy happens, and what would be a healthier thing. We try to talk to the families in our community that it's okay to talk to our kids about drugs and alcohol. It's okay to teach them what's out there. How can it affect us in our life if they don't have those healthy coping skills when something does happen, whether it's a small inconvenience or a big tragedy, they're going to go to what they see. I'm so grateful that you shared that. Let them know what drugs really can do, not only to their mind and to their body, but to their life.
You touched on a lot of good points too. It's that power of education and transparency, because the moment you're like, well, don't do that because I said, that fosters a lot of curiosity, right? Well, my mom said not to do that, but she didn't tell me why. And they're going to be more inclined to figure it out for themselves. And that's where I think the transparency lies and the importance of that. My dad was a narcotics detective in LA. He really wanted us to make sure that we were aware of what was happening, and if we had questions we could ask, and if we needed help we can also ask and feel comfortable to ask those questions. So essentially just creating that space, that safe space for individuals, especially the youth, because they have so many complex emotions going on and questions, and if we can answer them, even if we don't know the answer, I think is going to be huge. I mentioned before, I'm one of the oldest of 30 grandchildren, and being that resource for my cousins is one of the things that makes me the happiest, right? Being that safe space. If they have questions, if they don't feel comfortable enough to go to their parents, come to me, and then I'll figure out a way to bridge that gap. The last thing I want is for them to go off and venture and try things for themselves when they have the resources at their disposal.
Yeah, that's great. And that also, I think, talks about breaking that like stigma in our, Hispanic household of talking about, yeah, we do have family members that are probably using negative coping skills or dealing with substance use or mental health, and it's okay to talk about it. So we don't have to follow those steps. As a parent myself, just the impact and that connection that we have of sharing our stories, letting them know that, hey, like, I've been through that. I know, or I know somebody that's been through that, and it's okay.
That reminds me of the power of being vulnerable, right? You talked about sharing, storytelling. And when I think of vulnerability, I think of courage as well. And I know a lot of times we think people can assume that if you're vulnerable or emotional, you're seen as weak, when in reality it's the opposite. I can't think of one example of when someone's being vulnerable while not being courageous, right? You have to be courageous to be vulnerable. And that comes hand in hand with storytelling, because a lot of times it's personalizing that and being relatable and making sure that people don't feel alone. And that's the power of what you mentioned.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Nicole, once again for joining us and having this conversation. And congratulations on getting into medical school. And hopefully after you become a doctor, you can join us again.
Yes. Thank you for having me as a guest. I recognize that I may be one of the first to pursue this path, but I will make sure that I'm not going to be the last. And I'm sure you're going to encounter a lot out in the community. So I can't wait to be back hopefully one day as Dr. Martinez. But for now, Nicole's.